Do you think we see a little bit different Andrew Berry just because I'm with you? He admitted, like I did, he overvalued this roster. I thought the roster was really good, and it wasn't nearly as good as I thought it was.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. It feels like we have a track record with Barry because he's been here for 5 years, five drafts, five off seasons. But the last three he hasn't had the number one pick, and so his hands are tied. Obviously, the organization tied its own hands with that Deshaun Watson trade, but you haven't been able to see him maybe fully operate in a draft. Uh, we've never seen him draft a quarterback. So that's another huge thing. It's a huge unknown, and obviously that's number one in this offseason. And really, the only time you went and got a quarterback, it was before the offseason. It was the Deshaun Watson trade, and you had Baker, so it never felt maybe as extreme as it does now. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Andrew Berry, and I would say that he will be and needs to be more flexible. Maybe flexible might not be the right word because I do think he tries to learn from his mistakes, but he's going to have to evaluate everything. And there's going to be tough decisions. We talked about all the key positions. There's guys that they could cut to make, to save salary cap space. You got to decide who you commit to, who you extend, those kind of things. He's got a lot of big decisions to make. And, if they don't get him right, this could be his last chance. I mean, that's not news to anybody.
So here's another question that comes to mind. And I've said this. When I looked at the way he addressed things in the off season, all of it made sense. I didn't sit there and go, what are they? And I used to do that with some of the previous regimes, but all of what he was doing made sense. It just didn't work out. Do you kind of feel that way? Otherwise, there were times in the past where it was like, what are they doing?
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with that. And I know some people get sick of, they talk about the process and trusting their processes and they really feel good about them. And that gets old when you're losing games. But I do think there's value in that. And you can't just be randomly making picks or randomly listening to this guy or whatever probably past regimes in the Browns history have done. And I don't think the Browns fall into those traps at all. With Barry and DePodesta and Stefanski, it's a really sound structure. Now, that doesn't mean the talent evaluation's been spot on because it hasn't. And we can pick apart their drafts and even pick apart some of their free agent signings. But I think how they get to those decisions makes sense. Now, the decisions haven't been right. So you have to reevaluate those processes. And I think the other thing with Barry is, yes, all those moves made sense last year. But then when they don't all work out, and he overjudged, probably was too optimistic about when Nick Chubb and some of the tackles would be healthy, and thought that some of the guys on defense would necessarily take the next step and didn't. I think where that has an impact this offseason is you need to have more depth across the roster. And you probably have to take a harder look at some of your guys coming back and say, will this guy either recover after a poor 2024 or take the next step? And that's across the roster. It's for a guy like David Njoku, tight end, Martin Emerson, we talked about a little bit at cornerback. You have to do that with a big chunk of this roster because that's the only way you're going to make the necessary improvements that obviously they need to make.